Full disclosure, I have absolutely missed hanging out with you guys and geeking out about all things cars. So much so I've gotten a bit jealous of my guest hosts and all the time they get to spend with you each week. And then it dawned on me, what should I be saying when I first get back in front of the camera? And then I realized, perhaps a true story from my time during recovery, and I think this is about the best one. Got a call from my friends at Porsche, and they're like, we know you got a lot going on right now, but want to put something out there in the future for you. In a couple of months, we're going to be doing a launch of a very important car, and perhaps you want to be there. Do you think you can get a doctor's note? So of course, I hit the call button, got the doctor in there, and demanded he write a note. And sure enough, here I am walking and driving again a couple of months later, just in time for that very important car, which has more than 6 times the output of its great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. So today, you and I are going to return back to the camera together with the 2021 992 Turbo and our tech review. Learning what makes a turbo would be an ideal place to start, but being this is a 992, you and I will not be able to see the engine unless I take this thing to pieces, and I'd really love to give this car back in one piece, so you're gonna have to take my word for it. Underneath all this glass, metal, and this large spoiler is a 3.8 liter flat six, a boxer engine. After all, it is a 911. There are 2 turbochargers strapped to it. And really, it's the combination of the architecture change that happened in the 992 about 14 months ago and changes to the turbochargers that make this the 992 Turbo. So that architecture, that's something that is picked up from the smaller flat six that's in the 992. That's what's the same here. But this is obviously larger. It's a 3.8 turbo. And then there are 2 turbochargers strapped to this. They made changes to the turbochargers, and that the turbine wheel is now 55 millimeters, so that's 5 millimeters larger. And the compressor wheel is 61 millimeters, that's 3 millimeters larger. Now, that's all fine and good, but really what's the difference in terms of usability? Like the 992 architecture engine that we drove in Spain, and we're going to be talking about that a lot throughout 2 episodes here, this has the same direction of airflow. So the previous 911 Turbo, the turbochargers went in the same direction. In this generation of 992 Turbo, the turbochargers, they go in opposite directions now, and the whole idea is there's less drag on the air going into the engine. What does that translate to in terms of output? Well, there is quite a bump. It turns out 640 horsepower that comes in at 6,750 RPM. To give you an idea, that's about 60 horsepower more than the 991.2. And then the torque, which I find particularly important in flat 4 and flat 6 engines. Here it's 590 pounds of torque that comes in at 2,500 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 4,000 RPM. That is also a sizable difference in that it's 37 more pounds of torque than in the previous generation of 911 Turbo. Now, being this is a 992 that not only has a turbocharged engine, but also a badge that says turbo on the outside of the car, 2 very important points we need to cover before pressing on from the engine. First is the architecture of those turbochargers, variable turbine geometry. What that translates to is usable power throughout the entire power band. And then number 2, in this case, the transition from 991.2 turbo to 992 turbo is that torque we talked about, the 590 pounds, as well as the horsepower, 640 horsepower, that comes in without overboost. So it's not limited to like 5 seconds like it was in the 991.2. How many times have you and I played around in the options game with a Porsche only to find an entry that was $9,000 or $10,000? One entry that was entitled PCCB, otherwise known as Porsche Carbon Ceramic Brakes. Now the good news in the 911 Turbo is that the Porsche Carbon Ceramic rotors are standard on all 992 Turbo 911s. Now that's really not what's exciting to me. What's exciting to me is the dimensions of said rotors. So the rear rotors, those stay the same at 390 millimeters. The front, they grow from 410 millimeters to 420 millimeters. Then as you can see, It's still a yellow caliper. Now, there's something else different there while we're talking about those calipers. I would tell you the number of pistons, but I want you to come back for the first drive review, and the number is almost comical. I'll just leave it at that. So let's have a little fun with this segment, shall we? Porsche Doppelkupplung-Getriebe. Go ahead, say it with me. Porsche Doppelkupplung-Getriebe. Porsche Doppel, double, coupling or clutch, Getriebe, transmission, is what transfers 590 pounds of torque from the rear engine to all four wheels of a 911 turbo. Now, we learned last year in the 992 that Porsche completely re-engineered the PDK from the ground up, and they did that really for three reasons. Number one, they wanted to add an additional forward gear so they all have 8 forward gears. And then number two, they wanted to accommodate for coming electrification in 911. And then number three, they also wanted to accommodate for more torque, and here is the first example of that. Now, this not only has more torque, it has more horsepower, so they had to make some changes to that existing architecture of transmission from the 992, and they did a couple of things. Number one, the steel clutch plates are corrugated. Number two, the number of clutch plates go from 6 to 8. Then the first gear is shorter, the top gear is longer, the gear wheel sets are strengthened, and then there's the drive shaft, because after all, this is an all-wheel drive vehicle. They tell me it's lighter and more stable, but the only real piece of fact I can give you is there's now one universal joint. And I'd love to tell you what that all means in terms of driving the car, but there's an embargo, and I can't, it's a global embargo at that, and I cannot tell you what all that mumbo jumbo means on the road. So you have to come back for the full first drive review, and I promise I'll explain that a bit more. And now, charge air cooling systems. Not that that's entirely new for a 911 turbo, it's the change in which the plumbing direction works that's different. Now follow me here for a minute. A 991.2 turbo also had a charge air cooling system, but the way those worked is it picked up from the vents on the outside of the car, which you probably have seen them for years in 911 turbos, the vents that are kind of in the front part of the rear quarters, as well as these vents back here, and then would route the air to the front of the engine, or the back of the engine, depending on what you think is the front or the back of the engine in 911. For the avoidance of doubt, it routed the air to here. What's different here is the plumbing goes from the vent there and vent here all the way to back here. So let's call this the front of the engine now, and goes in and works in conjunction with the electronically controlled wastegate flaps and those symmetrically designed VTG turbochargers we talked about just earlier. And now Porsche will tell you this translates to 14% larger charge air cooling system and 13% more flow. Now that sounds all fine and good, but what does that turn into on the road? In reality, that turns into faster boost pressure, which is ideal in a car that's supposed to go fast. Now there are a couple of new options on offer in the 992 Turbo that I get a huge kick out of, so much so I wanted to share two of them with you. The first is a sport package, and that's kind of similar to what you see on BMWs in that it's a carbon fiber roof, so you couldn't get it on the cabriolet version of this. And then the lights in the front and the back have like a darkish, like black gray tint to them. And then the trim here goes to a gloss black. Now you're looking at this particular car, serial number ending 099. Does this have the sport package? Well, the answer would be no, because it's a late availability. They're not building it yet. But I do want to point something out. A buddy of mine just ordered a 992. And he had me come over and like, what do you think I should change on this? And one of the first things I changed was the trim here to the satin finish like on the GT3s, because it makes all the difference in the world. It's one of those subtle things, you don't know what it is, but people come up to it and say, why is that one of the nicest 911s I've ever seen? Even people who don't like cars and don't know what 911s are, still like, man, that is a beautiful looking car. And it's because of subtle trim changes like that. So I wouldn't go with the gloss black. The second thing is lightweight glass. Now, if you think about safety glass in an automotive application, they're really made up of three parts. There's two outer panes, and then there's an inner pane, and they sandwich it all together. In the case of the lightweight glass option, what they do is they have two thinner outer panes, and then they have a chemically pre-treated inner pane, sandwich that together. But here's the upshot of that. It only lowers the weight 8 pounds. But if you read through the tech stuff on this, they say it lowers the center of gravity. And I don't, you know, I'm a pilot. Center of gravity is everything. I don't see how 8 pounds in a 3,600 pound car could change the center of gravity. Is it just me? If you've seen any of our GT3 episodes, you know that Kumo and I are not big fans of the spoilers on those cars. This is a whole different kettle of fish because A, it's not obnoxious, and B, it has many party tricks that work in conjunction with many other bits around the car that make up active aero. Let's start with the elephant in the room, and that's this spoiler. Now, from a 991.2 turbo, that is 15% larger, and then the way it's manufactured is different. That is made out of my favorite material, carbon fiber reinforced polymer. A couple of things going on there. That is sort of in performance position. You can't really get it into performance position while the car is sitting still. You can only do it by getting to 160 miles an hour. And what happens there, it moves an additional 10 millimeters. And the reason why it does that is to put less load on the rear axle, thus making the car more usable at high speeds around a track. Now that is not the only party trick going on here. This works in conjunction with the flaps in the front, and we were first exposed to those in the base 992, and basically what they do is they're open up to 43 miles an hour, then they close from 43 to 93 miles an hour, and then at 93 miles an hour to 105 miles an hour, they sort of partially open, and then at 105, they're completely open. So yeah, it works in conjunction with everything on the car, even those little flaps on the side of the spoiler in the front, to make the car more downforce, but also more usable. Like, here's a trick that they've actually come up with. It now has an air brake. Frankly, I haven't gotten the car fast enough to even test that, but basically what the air brake does, in a panic stop, it brings up this whole bit here, as well as extends the front spoiler. You've seen that in 991.2. That has been around for a couple of years, and the whole idea is to create more drag to bring the car down to a faster stop. Now, that's all fine and good, but what does this translate to in actual downforce numbers? Well, speaking to Achim, it's 375 pounds of downforce. I'm not entirely certain if you guys are aware of this, but when you and I play around in the options game with a Porsche, almost invariably there is an entry entitled Sport Exhaust, and invariably it's always obscenely expensive, but you gotta have it because it sounds cool. Now notice I say almost invariably, at least the first time there, because we've never played a round of the options game with a 911 turbo that had a sport exhaust because it wasn't available. Well, apparently that's changed. It is now available, and aside from the airflow and the sound, there is an aesthetic change, and that is back here. If this were a base 911 Turbo S, basically without the sport exhaust, it would be here, and it would be square. But this, being fitted with a sport exhaust, it is oval, and yes, it is additional money, but this oval can be, I guess you can choose the color. Only two colors. There is a black like this, a gloss, or you can get it in silver. What I don't know is if they charge you for the different colors. Something we should probably find out. Well, I can't exactly say that is entirely everything about the 2021 911 Turbo. That is all I can share with you without driving it. And I can't legally drive it with you guys on camera until this coming Tuesday, April 7th. Actually, if I'm being pedantic, and this is a German car, so we have to be pedantic, it's in the wee hours of the morning, Wednesday, April 8th, German time, but we're in the California Republic, so you and I can drive it at 3:01 p.m. Tuesday, April 7th. Make sure you come back for that. Now, in the interim, I do want to share something with you that kind of surprises me. Remember when we did the whole deep dive on the base 992? We talked about the wider body and then the change in the architecture of the transmission, and that was all about accommodating coming electrification. I thought for certain that the 992 Turbo was the one that would get that electrification first. So call me crazy, but I'm missing it here. So I'm going to turn this around to you guys. Am I the only one that thinks that's a bit odd? Number two, what do you think is going to be the first 911 that is going to get electrification? And then number three, how are they going to do it? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media. MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I do want to end this by saying I really missed hanging out with you guys and talking about cars, and this was probably one of the best ways to come back in front of the camera with you. I mean, after all, how often do we get a totally new 911 Turbo? Every, what, 8 to 10 years? So I was really humbled that this is going to be the first car that I am sharing with you on camera, and very excited to drive it with you on camera this coming Tuesday. That doesn't mean we're done with the guest host. Brian is going to be coming back next Saturday with something rather special, not a direct competitor to this, but let's just call it something Italian. And then you're going to see an entirely new guest host at the end of April. So you're going to see a mix of episodes, some of me and some of the guest hosts. I really appreciate you guys sharing so many comments with them and coming back to the channel while I've been going through the recovery. Until I see you next time, bis später.